Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hello, everybody out there, and welcome to another edition of Live from the Heartland. This is going to be number 163 since the beginning of the pandemic, and we are recording it on July 24th and July 27th for the week of July 29th. I've got two guests today. My old friend Marilyn Katz will be on talking about Israel, a lot to talk about. And we're talking to the one and only, the great harmonica player, blues man, Charlie Musselwhite, who will be at Ravinia Festival on next Thursday. Some good news. I've been reading the papers and looking online and, soaking up the stuff. And there's a number of pieces on the Boy Scouts of America now being welcoming to LGBT people. One fellow talked about how hundreds of people came into their booth, asked questions. It was all very friendly. That's just another example of how people can change and organizations can change, particularly when they are pressured. You remember that the Boy Scouts were not too friendly to gays for a while, back around 2015. And it's been 8 years later, but things seem to be moving in a good direction. Not so good was the okay of the pipeline that runs through West Virginia and Virginia and is favored by that maverick Senator Joe Manchin. So just be aware of that. My union in the labor world, my union, which is the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, is still on strike, as are the writers. And the Teamsters seem to have, they were about to getting ready for a big strike. They seem to settle, and they're calling it historic and very good. But there is some question about the part-time employees and whether they will fare so well. We will keep you posted. Here in Chicago, there's a lot of talk all of a sudden about Bring Chicago Home, which is a grassroots movement of Chicagoans committed to creating a dedicated revenue stream to combat homelessness. There's a hearing in City Council this past week, and if you want to hear more about it, Network 49 is having a membership meeting, and many people could come to that. 7 o'clock, Loyola Park, 1230 Greenleaf, on Thursday, August the 10th. And we will be having someone come on the show from Bring Chicago Home. Okay, good. On the GOP Republicans being afraid of democracy front, I'm going to call your attention to the Ohio vote, which will take place on August 8th. It's a special election whether to support the measure, which would require not just 50%, as in the Constitution, but 60% of voters to pass any constitutional amendment. It has been a simple majority, and close to 60% of people say they oppose this new change, and we'll wait and see what happens. On the sports front, I'm letting you know ahead of time that my cousin and former Northwestern football player, actor, producer these days, Adam James, will be back next week with more news on the Northwestern hazing scandal that's going on and a little bit of information. So far, the U.S. women were victorious against the Vietnamese in soccer and played to a tie with Denmark, and we'll keep you posted on that. On the baseball front, two of my favorite pitchers, one would be Lucas Giolito and the other Ronaldo Lopez of the White Sox, are now California Angels. The Angels are trying to actually win a pennant, so maybe those guys will help out. On a sad front, a lot of you know that Sinead O'Connor, who gave a great performance on Saturday Night Live and then blasted the Pope, she has passed away. We're sorry to hear that. And an old friend of mine from the Movement newspaper and a lot of political work in the Bay Area, Karen Jo Coonan, has passed. And this week I did go to a memorial for our old friend Hank the Zutter. He passed away a year ago, but there was a memorial this past weekend, and it was really wonderful to hear his friends and his family talk. Last week we had Michael Deutsch of the People's Law Office on. You can get that at youtube.com. And we also had on Grania Duffy, the Irish singer, and both of those are available at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. Okay, so I think that'll be it for right now, and we'll be right back after a little music with our next guest. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. You are listening or viewing Live from the Heartland with Michael James. Okay, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of July 29th in the year of 2023. And it really brings me a lot of pleasure to bring on someone who I met at the Jazz Record Mart probably in 1962 when I was a young guy exploring Chicago. The one, the only, much heralded great blues harmonica player, Charlie Musselwhite, all the way from Mississippi. Good morning to you, Charlie.
Good morning. How y'all doing?
We're doing good. How is it down in Mississippi? I know it's been hot, and I'm not sure how the politics are these days down there.
Well, the Delta's blue in a red state. The Delta's blue.
Right on.
And it hadn't been uncomfortable here at all. It gets in the 90s, and there's always a breeze, but it's really comfortable, very comfortable.
Are you living in the town where you were born, or you got a new place?
No, Clarksdale. I was born in Kosciuszko in the hills.
Aha.
But I had 3 uncles that lived here, and I used to visit here often when I was a kid. So some of my earliest memories are from around Clarksdale and Friars Point. My mom grew up in Friars Point, which is just down the road here on the Mississippi River. And I'm right on the Sunflower River.
Oh, what a nice name.
Yeah, I get the country in the back and town right in front. I can walk anywhere downtown in a few minutes.
Is this your permanent home these days? Did you ever live in California or any other places?
I had a home in California, and the fires kept coming every year and more getting closer. And the last time, if the wind hadn't changed direction, I might have gotten burned out. And I told my wife, we better sell this house while we still have a house to sell. And we already had this brick building here in Clarksdale, so we shipped everything out here, and that's home.
Well, when I'm looking up information on you, it talks about you're born in Mississippi, then you lived in Memphis, and then you came to Chicago, and you were part of a kind of a great transition in the music world when the young guys like you, Mike Bloomfield, a whole lot of other people were learning from the masters. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that time in your life when you showed up in Chicago and you were hanging out with Bloomfield and probably Corky Siegel, Schwall, those guys, and Butterfield. What was it like back then?
Well, first of all, I had gotten started playing in Memphis, and I'd met a lot of the real old timers around the Beale Street area, like Will Shade and Furry Lewis and Earl Bell and a lot of guys. And I didn't have any goal to be a musician or be on stage or anything. I just loved the music, and they were all real welcoming to me and flattered that I would seek them out and hang out with them and learn guitar and harmonica. So when I went to Chicago, I already had this background, but I didn't know a thing about Chicago. I didn't know there was a big blues scene there. All I knew was a big city way up north with a lot of factory work that paid good and had benefits, and it was just way better. So, like thousands of other people leaving the South looking for a better job, that's the only reason I went to Chicago. But I was lucky that the first job I got was a driver for an exterminator, and I drove him all over Chicago. And so I got to learn the city real fast, and I saw all these posters and signs in the windows of bars. I remember seeing the Elmore James Tuesday night, and I remember going down 43rd and passing Pepper's Lounge, and there's Muddy Waters painted on the front. I thought, wow, this is fabulous. All my blues heroes that I had records of were right here in Chicago. So right away, I started hanging out in all the clubs, and I wouldn't go around, holding up a harmonica saying, "Can I sit in?" I didn't even tell anybody I played. I was just coming from Memphis. I already knew how to drink, so I just fit right in the crowd. And I would sometimes, request tunes or something, but I wasn't trying to get on stage, and I had no goal to do that. I just loved the music. I was just there to hang out. But what happened was a waitress I got to know real well. I'd played harmonica for her, and she told Muddy, "You ought to hear Charlie play harmonica." And I was like, "What? He plays harmonica?" And then Muddy insisted I sit in, and that changed everything. And other musicians heard me sitting in with Muddy and started offering me gigs, and boy, that got me focused. You're going to pay me to play harmonica? A ticket out of the factory.
So, what are some of the places you remember playing? You mentioned Pepper's Lounge. I don't think I ever got there, but as a young guy over those early years in the 60s, I remember going to the Blue Flame at 39th and Drexel. I also remember there was a scene developing at Big John's and on the north side. How did you meet the other, let's just say right out there, the other white guys who were coming on the scene?
Well, the thing about Big John's was me and Big Joe Williams were living in Old Town.
Right? Was he the guy with a 9-string guitar?
Yeah, he wrote "Baby, Please Don't Go."
Yeah, I remember him.
He knew Robert Johnson and Charlie Patton and all those guys. He was from an era before Muddy and Wolf and all Sonny Boy. So we're rooming behind a record store called the Old Wells Record Shop near Schiller and Wells. And up the street was just a neighborhood bar called Big John's. And they knew that Big Joe lived down the street, and I think they kind of thought he was some kind of a folk singer or something. They didn't really know what they were getting into, but they asked him to come up and play. I think it was the 4th of July. So, and Joe asked me to play with him like he often did. And we went up there and played, and they did so much business, sold so many drinks. They said, "Just come on back tomorrow night," And we kept playing, and they kept selling more drinks, and business was really good. And it turned into a regular gig. And Mike Bloomfield started coming around, and there was an old upright piano there, and he asked Joe if he could play the piano, and Joe said, "Yeah." So after a while, Joe had to leave town for some reason. He always was coming and going. And when he left town, Mike and I got a drummer and a bass player, and just kept the gig going. And then other bars on the north side started seeing the great business that Big John's was doing. Plus, we told them on the nights we weren't working, "Why don't you have Muddy Waters? Why don't you have Howlin' Wolf or Little Walter?" And so they started hiring blues bands from the South Side. And that was the beginning of the whole blues scene flipping over from the south side to the north side, because the clubs on the south side were just too small. They just couldn't pay. They didn't hold as many people as these bigger clubs on the north side. So the whole scene just flipped over, starting on that 4th of July with me and Big Joe Williams.
Do you remember a place called the Fat Black Pussycat on Broadway? I've got a photograph I did of Muddy Waters and James Cotton, and I remember them playing with a couple of young white kids, and I'm pretty sure that's the name of the place, but I got this great photo. I could send you a copy of it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I used to live, my first place I lived was 4040 North Broadway, near Montrose, I think.
Uptown.
I don't remember this club you're speaking of. Must have come after I left or something.
Well, what moved you out of Chicago? You know, I still think it's the greatest city in the world, and I know you're coming to town to play on August 3rd along with Elvin Bishop up at Ravinia. But you haven't been around here for a lot of years, except when you come to play now and then, or probably be in a movie once in a while.
Well, I really love Chicago. It was really good to me, and I have a lot of good friends there, and a lot of good friends that are not with us anymore. But it's a wonderful city in many ways, and I really miss it, and I have great memories of my time there. The winters are pretty rough on me, though. Well, I was having a great time in Chicago, and my first album came out. And suddenly I'm getting calls from all around the country, come play this club or that club. And I just kept putting them off because I was plenty busy and having a great time right there in Chicago. So finally, some guy offered me a whole month of work in California for really good money. So I thought, well, I'll just fly out there and do those gigs and come on back. But when I got out there, I discovered that the whole West Coast, all the way up to Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and down to San Diego, there are all these big venues, ballrooms, and they really, it's sort of like the Chicago story, south side to north side. Now it's Midwest to the West Coast. These are bigger clubs, and they pay way more money. I could actually work and not have to have a factory job, a day job, like you do in Chicago. Fact of the business, a lot of the guys in Chicago had day jobs, except for like Muddy or Wolf, because they had regular singles coming out and they toured, and so they were doing well. But all the other guys mostly had day jobs. So anyhow, there I am in California, and man, the weather was beautiful. All these young hippie girls are running around, and it was just I had no interest in California before I got there. Boy, my eyes opened up, and I just didn't go back.
Yeah, it was pretty nice out there. I was out at Berkeley in '64 for a couple of years, but I came back to Chicago, and I've had no regrets. Let me ask you, Charlie, a little bit about the evolution of the blues scene. You were around with the sort of the passing of the torch, or the inclusion of the younger, in this case, white kids. And I remember being stuck in a blizzard in Gary, Indiana in probably '67, I think it was.
I remember that.
A guy named Skip James was on the bus that was stranded along with us during the blizzard. And he was on his way to the University of Chicago Folk Festival. And I remember asking him to play a little music, and some younger African Americans started turning on their boom boxes. They didn't want to hear the older music. And I'm just wondering, I think now in the blues scene, which you're flying around the world doing the music, are younger Black kids coming back into the scene? What's the status of the blues scene these days?
Yeah, now it's become acceptable to younger and that's really great. I mean, you got a lot of really great players that are coming up that are not playing blues rock. They're playing really good blues, very tasteful, and they're interested in the history of blues, and they're studying the old recordings and stuff. I remember when I lived in Chicago, and was working in a factory, Monday morning you talk about what you did over the weekend
Blue Monday.
on your break, and I'd be talking about, well, I went to hear Muddy Waters, and these black guys my age would say, Muddy Waters, what's wrong with you? So I like Muddy Waters. And man, that's the old folks' music. You got to get up with the times, man. That stuff's over with. I said, well, I like Muddy. I like Howlin' Wolf. Howlin' Wolf, man, you are crazy. I mean, they just thought I was nuts. They couldn't believe it that I liked this old folks music, and they wanted nothing to do with it. I mean, zero. They said, you got to listen to the Supremes. I said, yeah, man, I like the Supremes, but I still like Muddy Waters. Oh, man. They couldn't believe it. So now it's really refreshing that that's turned around. And I saw something the other day. I forget who said it. Yeah, we're taking it back, as if somebody stole it.
No, kept it alive.
That
Kept
hardly
it
was
going.
the case.
Yeah. Well, you're on the road a lot. There are a lot of blues festivals these days, and you have reached a place in your life where you've gotten a lot of notoriety, and people have a lot of love and respect and want to hear your music. I'm wondering, for you as a working musician all these years, how do you keep your health? What kind of regimen do you have on the road? How do you stay healthy? Do you work out? Do you run? I had a kid in a band, a couple kids in a couple bands, and I know they were on the road all the time and they were eating terrible food. And I just wonder what your situation is that, because you got to be strong to be up there singing the blues.
Well, that's a good question. And I often wonder what other people do. I try to stay active. I like to walk, I don't go to the gym in the hotel or nothing like that. I should, but I don't. Very occasionally I might. But walking is good. And I try to eat well. I try to, not eat all the fried food I want. And I don't
that feeling.
eat much in the way of sugar or nothing. And I always carry organic, crunchy, dark roast peanut butter in my suitcase with low carb tortillas. So if I need a snack and I can't find anything decent to eat, I'll just have some of that till I can find something good. So I try to, eat salads or something and try to eat vegetables. But it's hard.
Am I correct that I read somewhere that you had listened to a song about a young woman who was stuck in a well, and then you, after you heard that song, you gave up drinking? I don't know if you still have.
No, it wasn't a song. I was on my way to work.
Okay.
Having to work, and I was listening to the radio, and on the news they were talking about this little girl that fell in a well in Texas named Jessica McClure, and she's down in the bottom of the well, and I think she has a broken arm, and they've lowered a microphone down so they could talk to her, and she's in a life and death situation. They're not sure how they can get her out or what to do. And I was really impressed by her bravery. I mean, there she is in the bottom of a well, and she's like singing nursery rhymes to herself. And here I am on my way to work to do something I know perfectly well how to do. And I've been toying with this idea of not drinking and I couldn't figure out how to quit for some reason. It sounds odd to say, but I just never been on a stage sober. And, if you're drinking, being in the spotlight, everything's okay. And I didn't like being in the spotlight all that much. But kind of like a prayer for her, I said, I ain't drinking until they get her out of the well. And I didn't say I was quitting drinking. I just said I wasn't going to drink till they got her out. It took them about 3 days. And in that 3 days, that I was out of the well too. I just never had another drink after that.
Well, congratulations. I know it's a struggle. I confess to drinking a little tequila along with my weed, but I think the drinking can get rough, particularly in the music world. Charlie, I was looking at a long list of all your albums, and it's a little overwhelming. I'm still looking for my copy of Stand Back, but I did find Tennessee Woman. But I then noticed, and this is the week of the July 26th, which was the Cuban Revolution. And I read that you had done an album called Continental Drifter, and it was with some Cuban bands, and you were kind of branching out. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about doing that album and what it was like mixing it up with some Cuban musicians.
Well, Eliados Ochoa is this group called Quarteto Patria, and we're really good friends to this day. And in fact, he has a new album out that just came out that I play on one track called West is the title of the tune. And I forget the title of the album, but he still lives in Cuba, but tours the world. When I was living in Memphis, going around to all the junk stores looking for blues records, old 78s, anything else that looked interesting, I'd buy that too.
Nice.
Just to hear what it sounded like. So I discovered a lot of music from around the world, like flamenco and rimbetica from Greece, and that had this feeling to it that reminded me of blues, this spirit. So I became open to music from around the world that had this feeling to it, like blues does. And this type of music from Cuba called traditional son, S-O-N, is what Quarteto Patria and Eliados Ochoa were playing. I mean, these guys didn't wear the ruffled shirts with the pants up to their armpits and playing bongos. These guys wear jeans and cowboy hats, and they're real down home. They live in the Oriente, the eastern end of Cuba, and they're cowboys, and they're from the country, and they played. I call Eliados Ochoa the Muddy Waters of Cuba. He plays a 7-string guitar, and we just hit it off immediately. Well, anyhow, so I discovered Quarteto Patria, and I knew a guy that could get CDs from Cuba. And I had everything they'd recorded, and I really knew their music. I was playing a festival in Bergen, Norway, and the promoter, turns out he is also a fan of Quarteto Patria. Each one of us is the first person we met that knew anything about them, even knew they existed. And so it was exciting to meet another person that knew about them. Well, he calls me some months later and says, guess what? I got Quarteto Patria coming to my festival. I want you to come back. So I went back the next year, and I'm thinking, man, I got to take me one of them DAT recorders in case we get to jam or something. Then I thought, well, they probably have a studio there in Bergen, Norway. Why don't we just go in and record? So my idea was to have them play Cuban rhythms under blues as an experiment. Well, I played them some blues tracks, and I could see them like, oh no, they knew nothing about blues. They'd never even heard of B.B. King. I mean, so they liked it, but they didn't know what it was. So I said, that's okay. Play your tunes. I know them, and I'll put my own lyrics to them. And that's what I did.
Well, I'm going to look forward to getting that and hearing it. I have a good friend named Pablo Menendez who has a band called Mezcla down there. His mother is Barbara Dane, who was a blues jazz singer. We brought them, whenever Bush was out of office, we brought them to a place I ran called the Heartland Cafe. And, I think you guys had probably hit it off, but his mom. Let me ask you about, you got a new album out, and I think, I don't know if it's a solo album. It's called Mississippi Sun. How about giving a little info on that one?
Okay, I will. But before that, I'd just like to say on YouTube, you can hear those tunes I did from Continental Drifter.
Oh, on YouTube, good.
Okay.
I love YouTube. You can get a lot of great stuff on there.
It's amazing what you can find. So the pandemic was on, and everything was shut down, and I wasn't touring, I wasn't working anywhere. I'm just here in Clarksdale, and 3 blocks away, a good friend of mine has a studio, and it's a really good studio. Morgan Freeman does his voiceovers for ads there.
Yeah.
And so I was just hanging out over there, and he's got a lot of guitars, and I'm just playing around. And And one day he says, "You mind if I tape some of these tunes you're playing?" I said, "No, go ahead." So every time I'd come by, I'd tape another couple of tunes. And at some point, my wife said, "This could be an album." And we thought about it and listened back to what we had and thought, yeah, it could be. So then we brought in a local drummer named Quicksand and a bass player named Bud Bays, and did some more tunes and filled it out. And I was playing guitar on every tune, so I overdubbed my harmonica. And we sent it to Alligator, and they loved it. And I mean, they really loved it, and it got great reviews all over the world. And I'm kind of proud of it myself.
Well, I'm going to look forward to listening to it. Now, I understand, and well, I know you're going to be playing up at Ravinia in Highland Park on August the 3rd at 7:30, and you got Elvin Bishop with you. And I remember meeting Elvin Bishop back in about 1962. I've heard all you guys play a bunch. How about giving us a little bit of a promo for your concert together at Ravinia coming up in another week or so?
Well, Elvin and I, we met back in Chicago and were acquainted, but we really became much better friends after we both moved to California. And we have just a great time. We sit side by side. We have Bob Welsh playing piano and or guitar backing us up. And I'll do a tune, Elvin will do a tune. We'll tell stories in between tunes. Some of the stories, they're all amusing, but at the time, some of them weren't amusing. We just have a really good time, and we enjoy each other's company and each other's music, and we know the music so well, we can play together just as easy as falling off a log, and we really resonate. And we have so much fun, the audience can't help but have fun. So it's a real good time.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you on August 3rd and 7:30. It's going to be a great show. Highland Park had a pretty heavy disaster with some shooting a while back. It'll be the first time I've visited, but it's a wonderful town. Ravinia is a wonderful setup and a great place. I want to ask you one more thing. I know that I heard that your mother and your dad both played instruments, and you've been playing now for a long time. And I think your family tradition goes on. You have a daughter, I understand, named Layla, who's down in New Orleans. Yeah. She's a singer, songwriter, a slide guitarist. How about a little promo and a shout out to your daughter?
Well, we'll be on the legendary Rhythm and Blues cruise October, and Elvin and I will be there, and my daughter Layla will be there, and she has a new album out. She'll be selling her albums her CDs on the cruise. It's going to be a really great cruise. She's doing really great.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing her too. You have a real warmth. You emanate a warmth. I was not sure. I says, I wonder what this guy's going to be like when I talk to him. But I'm really looking forward to not only seeing you next week, but talking to you some more. And I'm going to ask you as we close out this segment of the Live from the Heartland show for the 29th of July, if there's anything I didn't ask you that you would like to share with the masses who will be listening or viewing this segment.
Well, we just love to play the blues for people, good blues, and I hope they come and hear us. And I guarantee you'll have a good time. We'll all have a good time. We'll go home with a smile on our face. We're going to blow all the blues away. Won't be none left.
What a guy. Charlie Musselwhite, it's an honor and a pleasure to make your acquaintance again since 1962. And we'll see you next week up in Ravinia.
I'll be looking for you.
Right on, brother. We'll be right back.
My friend.
We're live from the Heartland. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial.
She needs drift from town to town. As long as she's feeling low, you know that's right, baby. ¿Qué te parece, Cholita? ¿Qué te parece? She's just a sad-eyed girl with a drifting heart. Cholita? ¿Qué te parece? I think my baby's getting restless. She'll soon be gone again. She knows I'll catch up with her. Can you tell me where or when, Cholita? ¿Qué te parece, Cholita? ¿Qué te parece? Yeah, man, that girl can be hard to find sometimes. ¿Qué te parece? We think someday we may find the road that'll take us on home. Then we'll all be happy and no more need to roam. You know what I mean, baby. ¿Qué te parece, Cholita? ¿Qué te parece? There she goes on down the road. ¿Qué te parece, Cholita? ¿Qué te parece?
Well, welcome back to more Live from the Heartland for the week of July 29th. And it always brings me great pleasure to bring on an old friend, someone I've worked with and really greatly admire, the one and only Marilyn Katz of MK Communications. She's an organizer. She's a political strategist. She is something else. And we've been dancing around trying to get her on to talk about Israel. And the stuff in Israel just keeps unfolding. I'd like to share at the start that I grew up in a town that was pretty progressive. It was an upper middle class town in Connecticut, Westport. And there were a lot of very progressive Jewish people in my town. I grew up, liking Israel. I read Exodus. But over the years, as a political hombre, my support for Israel has really dissipated greatly. And I'm really sad about some of the situations that people over there, particularly the Palestinians, are dealing with. As we bring Marilyn on, I would like to just read from the Israeli Declaration of Independence. Quote, the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Marilyn, you sent that to me, and you had a HMMMM after it. Take it away. What do we make of all this?
Well, so when I was a small child, I went to a Jewish school, and I was taught by Sabras, those people who had been raised in Israel, and they were all progressive socialists. So I grew up by the time of 3 to 8, viewing Israel as a positive, in fact, in the sanctuary of the temple on the ceiling still today is written, all created equal. So that formed a sense of Jewish values that I thought went back hundreds of years to fight for socialism. And there was a real division, I've learned later, between the progressive socialists who founded the country and worked the kibbutzim and folks who were more right-wing, like in the Irgun, who were terrorists, essentially, who terrorized the Palestinians. And then by 1967, Michael, right after I met you, it was clear the game was over, that Israel had become a bellicose state. My Jewish relatives would say things like, the only good Palestinian is a dead Palestinian. And so even by then, it was clear that Israel had transformed itself from a haven into a colonizer state. And the folks that they colonized were the Palestinians. So I personally stayed away from Israel and the issue for decades. And the first time I went to Israel was in 2000 when it looked like there might be an accommodation between an independent Palestinian state and an independent Israel, mutually respectful. But even then, it was clear that Arabs and also Black Jews from Ethiopia were very unequal in Israel proper. However, that's when the prime minister stepped on the Temple Mount on a Friday and created an uprising, which became the Second Intifada, which was the pretext that Israel used to take what is now 68% of the land in the West Bank and control all of it, which is startling. So if you went back today, which I've gone pretty much every year until 2019 to the pandemic, you would see the Israelis having used the pretext of the Second Intifada to totally wall off the individual villages within the West Bank. It almost looks like a muffin tin. So in order to say, for example, to take a trip that would normally take 5 minutes between Lincoln Park and Lakeview, it would take an hour and a half by the time you went away, all the way around the walls. So in the last 20 years, what has happened and what has allowed what happened, well, let's talk about what happened last week and then go back.
Yeah, let me just share that, what really hit home for me was when my mom went to Israel with a church group. And when she came back, and she really loves everybody. She says, Mike, they don't treat those Palestinians very well. And it's clear that we have a lot of Palestinians in refugee camp in Jenin, which was recently attacked. We have big demonstrations in the streets over people not wanting them to limit the powers of the Israeli Supreme Court. It's just ongoing. So give us a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a lot more, but so why now? Why this? So last week, and these things go together, it is true that the Netanyahu government has proposed limiting the ability of the Supreme Court to act on laws that it passes and makes it the Supreme Court to be appointed by the party in power for that moment. So it would be like, Trump would get to appoint the entire Supreme Court. So there are two things about it. While a lot of the Israeli protest has focused on, religious rights and gay rights and trans, the real objective here is to allow, in my opinion, to allow Israel to totally annex the West Bank and make sure that any law that, right now, if you're a Palestinian, you can't get a building permit. If you're a Palestinian, there are 120 different rules to get a pass into Israel. If you're a Palestinian, you cannot go from your town to the sea if you live in the West Bank. And you have no right to challenge the taking of your lands. So at the moment, as bad as that is, it would be worse because you would have no independent Supreme Court even to appeal to. So many of us who've been really dealing with this issue, while we are very sympathetic to the civil liberties of our sisters and brothers who are Israeli Jews, are really looking at the issue of occupation, and that this move on the Supreme Court is part of fulfilling what a section of the Jewish community has wanted from the beginning. It's not just Netanyahu, which is the total removal of Palestinians from the West Bank. And not by, in 1948, between 750,000 and 1 million fled. Right now, the tactic has been to make living on the West Bank impossible. No water systems, disconnected from the grid. No building permits, no ability to move freely, not only between the West Bank and Israel, but between one village and another. the inability to go to school, the inability to easily get an education. The message is clear. It's better if you leave.
Marilyn, let me jump in and ask you, what's the situation for Palestinians who live in Israel? And I understand there's about 1/3 of the Israeli population is non-Jewish, to be Palestinian mostly. What's that situation?
It's a second and third class citizenry. Last year, they made Hebrew the official language of Israel and took down many of the dual signages. When getting permits to build housing has the same kind of challenges that the West Bank has. Thirdly, you don't have rights. If I'm a Palestinian, if I'm an Arab Israeli, and I go to marry someone from Jordan or the West Bank, I can no longer live within Israel. The schools are less funded. The Arab towns are in shambles. The streets, it is worse than Black towns in the United States in terms of resources, in terms of equitable funding, in terms of rights.
I'm wondering what people can actually do. I know that there's an issue that brings it back to Illinois, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I got some news today. It might have been one of the things you sent me, but it said Biden is weighing a big Middle East deal. And, he's talking about trying to do some kind of a peace deal with Saudi Arabia to open up recognition of Israel by a number of Muslim-dominant countries, as long as the Palestinians were treated fairly in this arrangement. What do you know about this big Middle East deal that Biden is looking at?
I read it on the same, that's why I sent it to you from Tom Friedman. I had not known about it. I think that is a potential, but let's be real. We are a year away from elections, and the Jewish vote has been 75% of all Jews vote Democratic. You should know that. And they don't really vote on Israel. They really vote on all the progressive things for which Jews tend to fight, women's rights, abortion rights, blah, 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 civil rights. That said, I don't know. It's clear that Biden has not been able to, even though he's been pushed by the progressive Jewish organizations, and there are many, J Street, APN, the Progressive Jewish Network, he has not been bold. In fact, it's really interesting to me that the person who has been boldest is Nicholas Kristof. Nicholas Kristof proposed this week that funding for Israel be predicated on the promise by Israel not to expand the settlement. Bernie Sanders today came out with the same. I don't think it goes far enough. I think the Jewish community should take the lead in asking for retrenchment. Here's how I think about it, Mike. You and I became very politically active over civil rights and the war in Vietnam. And I consider the Palestinians today as Vietnamese. If, in fact, it had not been for the Holocaust, all of us would have been fighting for anti-colonial liberation of the Palestinian people. And, and that's what I think we have to do today. So I think we do need to pressure the feds to deny aid unless there's a retrenchment and a commitment not to. It may not work, but it's got to be the demand. And secondly, on a local level, we should use an anti-BDS fight to educate people, as we did in South Africa, on the apartheid within Israel property and the colonization in the West Bank and Gaza. I'm game. Nothing like a good fight. And this is a good one.
Let me ask you, I know that there is an Illinois law that I want to address as we go out, but we have a few minutes left. And I'm wondering, I live up here in the 49th Ward, and it used to be, Irish Catholic and Jewish predominantly, and both of them not so much anymore, but a little west of here, I see all kind of Orthodox Jews on the street, and I'm wondering, and I see signs that, synagogues support Israel. I'm wondering what is in the States, and particularly here in Chicago, is there a split in the Jewish community, liberal and then conservative? Where's that all at?
So if you took the city and the suburbs, you would say that in terms of membership, AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and it's a right wing, is bigger in terms of membership, paid membership. But I would say that in terms of voting and in terms of action, actually the majority of the Jewish community is unaligned and critical of Israel. Now, the West Side crowd, forget it. I mean, they're a thing to themselves. They're very religious, they're very kosher, they're very Orthodox, and they keep to themselves. And it would be unlikely that they would ever kind of critique Israel at all.
There's a law in Illinois passed by the General Assembly here, and we're really a blue state, a progressive state compared to most others. In 2015, the Illinois General Assembly passed a law making it illegal for the state to do business with any company that refuses to do business in the occupied West Bank. And that would include Ben & Jerry's, who were a target of the lawmakers, because they basically sell ice cream in Israel, but wouldn't sell it in the occupied West Bank. There's an Illinois anti-boycott law that hinders protests of Palestinians' oppression. And, we want to protest. We want to demand justice. What do you had a piece in the Tribune, I believe, an op-ed piece recently.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what we can do to try to change this law. I'm going to right away talk to my state rep and my state senator.
It's a really interesting question. So I tried this 2 years ago when I first learned it, when Ben & Jerry's came up. And frankly, Mike, everybody, including all the so-called progressives, were afraid of the issue. So my feeling is, and I'd love to hear from people, that Jews and other progressives have to take the lead, make it comfortable for our less than intrepid elected officials to stand up. And I'm talking about the ones who consider themselves the most progressive. This is not, it cannot be left to Abdel Nasser Rashid to fight this fight. This is a Jewish fight. We created the situation. We need to solve it. So I am looking, hopefully we'll get the cooperation of both J Street and Americans for Peace Now and a bunch of progressive rabbis to begin to wage a campaign this fall that goes at the removal of this law. And so I'm very eager to hear from people.
Well, let's keep pushing this issue. You and I need to be talking to each other more. And I'm going to have you back on the show with more news about Israel or anything you care to discuss, Marilyn.
There's always stuff I want to discuss.
Yeah, I'm sure you're full of ideas. And if we weren't running out of time here on this week's Live from the Heartland, we'd talk more. But we're going to leave it at that. But give you
I'll be back.
Go give 1 minute about what you want people to be doing.
So I want everybody to read what's happened in the last weeks in Israel. And then I want everyone to contact both their state rep and senator, but also their alderperson. Because what I was able to stop 2 years ago was a similar resolution in the Chicago Human Rights Council. So make the difference. We can make the difference. So either write me at mkatz@mkcpr.com, call Michael, but most important, let me know what you need for information so you can call your state rep, your state senator, and don't let them get away with it. We cannot privilege Jewish voters in the state over Palestinian or Jordanian or any other ones. So thank you.
You know, last week we did have Michael Deutsch on, and one of the things he's talking about is a Palestinian who is having issues with citizenship, etc. And that would be like all of the Heartland stuff. It's at youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos. I want to thank our guests this week. I want to thank Charlie Musselwhite, the great harmonica player. I want to thank Marilyn Katz, one of my favorite activists in the whole world. And I want to encourage you all to tune us in next week when, for the August 5th show, we're going to have an old friend, Lincoln Bergman, talking about the Freedom Archives. And we're going to also have Adam James doing a sports report, my cousin who played football at Northwestern. And I encourage you all to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we all do together. All power to the people. Over and out. Have a great week.
Are you doing the best you can? Over the mountain, under the big blue sky, you got a dream awaiting. I can see it in your eye. It may not come easy, but you know you've got a friend. I'll be by your side the entire ride. Just let me hear you say amen. Are you doing? Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing? Are you doing the best you can? Tout donne, est-ce que tout donne le meilleur de toi-même parce que tu l'aimes? Tout donne, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même si tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même quand tu l'aimes? Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing?